Hi guys, it's Vince here once again, and today I'm going to be giving you my thoughts on Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. More specifically, I'm going to be talking about some of the things we've seen so far, the trailer itself, and what I'd like to see personally from the game. However, first of all, before I do so, I'd just like to point out that I myself am, of course, a big Zelda nerd. I've personally completed all of the Zelda console games. I've actually just completed Wind Waker recently, and I'm a massive fan of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. I've completed both a number of times, and Ocarina of Time in particular I still come back to this day. Twilight Princess I also really enjoyed with its darker tones, and that was kind of the Zelda game I was hoping for. And I'm actually always quite surprised when I hear that it's one of the less admired games of the series. I think in particular the gameplay is awesome, and the whole Twilight world and the way that went was really cool. Onto Breath of the Wild. So in terms of what we've seen both from the trailer itself and the hour and a half of gameplay footage which they've released, as well as a few other bits and pieces, that there's a few things which I've really found which I thought were quite interesting. The first of which was that this is clearly a very open world we're going to be playing in. You see Link going across these huge vistas, camping out with fires, sneaking up on people, coming across single monsters on their own. And I think that's really cool. I think it's definitely something that would be an interesting change. I think we've seen more and more of it. I think, funnily enough, Twilight Princess actually had a bit of a sense of that with the day and night cycles, and it was quite a large map, or at least it felt like that at the time. And I think that would be a really good fit for the Legend of Zelda games. On that note, you also see things such as camping, swimming, cooking, hunting animals, and I think that's really cool as well, and something a bit different, and gives the game a bit more of a sense of a mix, rather than just going around hunting things, picking up rupees, and going through some of the general things that you may expect with a Zelda game. One of the other things which I was also really excited about, and I thought was really cool, is that you see Link picking up and finding new weapons, things like spears, maces, random swords. I think your weapons can even break, if I remember correctly, at one point in the trailer, and I think that's really cool as well. It's just another example of breaking up this formula, doing something different, and giving it a fresh feel, I suppose. I mean, you can even see him doing like quite out there stuff, like pushing boulders down hills, surfing on his shield is in the hour and a half of footage they showed, and there's a piece where he sneaks up on a horse and goes riding around on it, and it's really weird. It's almost kind of like Grand Theft Auto Legend of Zelda in some ways, but I think that would be really cool, and it would be really interesting to have that kind of open world feel to this type of game. Also, as a side note, Breath of the Wild is obviously the title of the latest game. Usually the titles of the games are very indicative of what the story is, what the general theme is. Skyward Sword was obviously all about the Master Sword and the story behind that. Majora's Mask is self-explanatory. Ocarina of Time is fairly self-explanatory. Wind Waker is very self-explanatory. So perhaps this signals a much deeper focus on nature and exploring and going out and finding things. So I think that would be an interesting new twist, and I'd really like to see how that plays out. The map is evidently huge. You can see things like the mountains off in the distance. There's a volcano, it looks like, at one point. There's a part in the trailer where he's on a beach and he's walking across it, and you can see some ducks. So it feels like it's very much open world. It's not kind of segmented off into little places and things. So with that in mind, does that perhaps mean that there are very few loading screens? I think that would be a good thing to see, because I can remember with Skyward Sword, it's quite kind of broken down into little areas. You go from one bit and then you get past some obstacles, then you go into the temple, then you go into another room in the temple, and then you go out the temple, and it can break things up. It breaks up the sense of immersion, definitely. I remember being a little bit disappointed with that in Skyward Sword. Another point which I think is actually quite major is that there are no real signs of towns here. That I didn't see any kind of even an outpost in which Link walks through and sees a market stall or children running around in a village or anything like that. So does that mean there's no civilization? Does that mean there's no kind of rest point or anything like that? Or that's a really interesting point for me, and I haven't seen anyone talk about that. And another major thing, which is part of the kind of typical formula as you would see it of the Zelda games, is that there's almost always a companion you have, you know, Midna, Navi, Tail, you know, there's almost always some form of companion that you carry along with you. So there doesn't appear to be any evidence of that. So I think that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to break away from that, in my opinion. Obviously Skyward Sword in particular, and Ocarina of Time, Navi drives you absolutely nuts. So I think it may be not such a terrible thing, but it'll be interesting to see what they do there. It does seem from the trailer itself as though the Impas play some kind of significant role, as we see scenes in which there's I think it might be in the trailer or the footage, where the Impas are talking to him, and there's kind of these Impa style temple entrances. As a final point in terms of gameplay, there's a very short moment where you can see Link wearing metal armor. So I don't know if that has an interaction with how strong your defense is, if that's something you have to bear in mind against certain enemies. Maybe even, dare I say it, there's a bit of a Dark Souls element there of, you know, you're stronger and you can take more of a hit, but you're slower, and you know there's a kind of tactical awareness there. I think that would be really good, and it would give much more depth to the combat without having to add a tremendous amount of strain in developing the game. And obviously, if you're anything like me, Dark Souls is absolutely awesome and has a very in-depth sense of gameplay and the workings within that, and that would carry over to Zelda, I think, very well. So moving on to story, it definitely seems, again looking at the temples and some of the other references, we see that the goddess Hylia is a very big focus here. With that in mind, it seems as though in fact some people have come out and said that they think it's a direct sequel to Skyward Sword, because you can see what they're calling Calamity Ganon running, kind of hovering around what looks like Hyrule Castle in the distance, in some kind of impure form, and he seems to be out of control. And obviously when I don't want to spoil things, but when Skyward Sword wraps up, there's some references as to how Demise fits into the overall series as a whole. So that's also an interesting point. Also, the art style isn't worlds apart from Skyward Sword. Skyward Sword, of course, had a bit more of a kind of I would say it's reminiscent of Wind Waker in some respects, and this style seems to be some kind of almost a mix of the two, maybe a little bit more it's kind of hard to describe, but maybe a little bit more colourful and edgy in terms of the way the characters are designed. But I have to say, I think I'm very happy with the art design as well. Furthermore, in regards to the story, Link wakes up 100 years after something. We don't know what that exactly is, but there are a lot of ruins around, so that clearly indicates to some kind of problem. You know, Calamity Ganon appears, and if I remembered some of the text correctly, it says the last time he was locked away was presumably this 100 years ago, whenever this happened, and it indicates to some kind of war or major issue where perhaps Link wasn't around, the hero of time or whatever he was called. So maybe that signals a major departure from the formula itself as well, or maybe there was another hero, and maybe that hero, you know, something happened, because we can also see, of course, that the Master Sword is very damaged. So that again, it signals to some kind of larger departure from the story, or something going wrong. What I also thought was quite interesting, and again, I don't think obviously a lot of people like to do Zelda videos, so it may well have been covered, but I haven't seen anyone note that the narrator specifically refers to Link audibly by name and calls him Link. They don't say the hero of time or anything like that, and that's the first time I've seen that in any Zelda game. So does that signal perhaps more of a focus towards actual audible speech in the game as opposed to text bubbles? Personally, I think that could be interesting if they do that well, and perhaps we don't choose a name for the hero. Link is just his name. I would prefer that personally. You know, as much as it's nice to call him Vince or whatever you want to call him, it does take you out of the game a bit, because at the end of the day, I know I'm not the hero of time. you know, I think this open-ended storyline as well is going to be very interesting from a gameplay perspective, because they're saying they very much want to mix that up. And in fact, some people have said that apparently you can actually go straight through to the end of the game and fight Ganon right from the very start, as opposed to having to go all the way through the story and do this and get 3 of these and 4 of that and then complete the Master Sword and all this. And I think that would be very refreshing, and it would give you, weirdly, I think it would give you more of a sense of the actual overall storyline and what's happening, because you can mess with it and you can change with it and see what happens. So I think that would be really great, and I'd really like to see that, as opposed to this usual kind of almost, I don't think it's fair to say cookie cutter, but there's an element of it's the same old formula. As a further comment on that, and this is something people have also mentioned, if the story changes and if you can approach Ganon at the beginning of the game, does that mean if you were to become stronger and if you were to recover the Master Sword and repair the Master Sword, surely Ganon would have to, or whoever it is, would have to become stronger to then make the fight interesting? So does that mean Ganon changes, and is he released, and who does he go, you know, what does he turn into? And that raises a whole load of questions, which I think is really interesting. As a final point, and this doesn't seem to be something that's been addressed too much, and perhaps it has, but we see these kind of like almost tentacle monsters running around, and they light up and come out of nowhere, and if I'm not mistaken, you do see kind of a boulder coming out from the sky at some point. Now I may be confusing that with Calamity Ganon himself, but these monsters, it's not really explained very clearly what they are, and they are also shown in a number of the ruins throughout the game, so it seems as though they have some kind of central relation to whatever this disaster was that happened 100 years ago. So I think that's also interesting. And on that note, I would personally really like to see a newer, a more different nemesis than, you know, Ganondorf or Ganon at the end of every game. You know, it's great that we have this kind of trio, and obviously all the lore that takes place with Link, Zelda, and Ganondorf, but it does become a bit repetitive in my opinion. It's one of the things I'd really like to see them change, and I think they did that to some extent with Wind Waker. I think they did that with Skyward Sword. They definitely did that and explained a lot of the lore, and that was great, but I'd like to see them do that more. You know, we don't want to see the same story again and again. So with that said, I think on the story side it looks really interesting, and I want to see how that unfolds. In terms of the overall sound and how it comes across, there's as I've said, this feeling of nature and ambience that it creates, and almost a feeling of loneliness, you know, without an apparent companion. And I'm wondering if that's something that's going to play in, but it really creates that feeling of, from what I've seen, that you are out in the wilderness and you are on your own with nature, and I think that's really cool, and the sound definitely appears to feed well into that. I've already covered graphics fairly briefly. Obviously we can only comment on what we've seen, and it definitely has a very striking style. It's standard Zelda. It looks beautiful, the environment's beautiful, the weapons and everything comes together really nicely, so I think that's awesome. So I think that pretty much covers everything as far as the core features that I've seen. Hi guys, it's Vince here once again, just very briefly. So of course you've been watching my Breath of the Wild video. In the process of making this video, I've realized that I've actually inadvertently made it a lot longer than I intended it into. So with that in mind, I'm going to split it into 2 pieces. So there's going to be the piece you've just seen, and I'm going to do a second piece, effectively giving my thoughts, what I'd like in terms of what I'd like to actually see in terms of what they bring through in the new formula, as well as what they're keeping from the old. So I'm going to put that on as well. Hopefully you enjoy that as well. Obviously I'm a bit carried away here. I have to say I'm really excited about Breath of the Wild. I think it's going to be really great. So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it. Don't forget to like and subscribe and let me know what you think below, and yeah, I'll see you next time.